Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rise of the Phoenix, one of the officers of my second fellowship, Bowser Gaming. I gave him a shout out in the last video, if I remember correctly. He asked me to do a tier 4 unit overview for Gondor's Swan Knights, and it made a lot of sense to me because every single time I've played a faction, I've gone ahead and done a tier 4 unit overview for that faction. So here in a minute, we'll talk about which commanders to use them on, what sort of army compositions they would work well in, and also just their stats in general. But first, if you enjoy my content, please do consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Welcome back, everyone. Before we talk about the Swan Knight, I promised this guy on my server, Spazzy the Dark, that I would give his garden a shout out. I agreed to do it because I thought his garden was actually quite creative. It amused me that he made graves for his enemies of this season. So there's a Gondor grave here, Mordor, Rohan, and Linden. He is playing Angmar on my server. Fingers crossed, hopefully this will not be a prophecy that will eventually come true. Hopefully Gondor will continue to see great success, but hey, thought it was a cool garden, figured I would share it. So there you go, Spazzy. Let's talk about the Swan Knight now. So I've managed to recruit a whole bunch of these guys. These guys are awesome units in my opinion. They are a men unit, a man-ish unit as it's referred to sometimes. They're also a cavalry unit, obviously. So they do get the mounted damage received buff there. And what makes them really cool is actually their protector ability. So for the first 3 rounds of combat, I don't know if I can, oh, there we go, 3 rounds of combat, I gotta get used to the webcam thing. They actually take normal attacks on behalf of allies. So I don't believe this applies to commander skills, like how Alerts does a whole bunch of damage with Raid and Uruk-hai Firstborn and all of those other skills. I don't think it applies to those, but any enemy units that are attacking with a normal attack, which is pretty much every unit in the game except like Linden's T4, I think. So yeah, they take the hits instead of your other units, and they get an incredible, at 10 of 10, plus 100 defense for those first 3 rounds, which means without any gear coming into the picture, without any commander abilities coming into the picture, for those initial 3 rounds, you're going to have 166 base defense. They also have 98 HP per and are 50-man squads. The closest comparison to these guys, if we remember these stats right here, 98 health, 66 defense, 27 to 34 damage, they're essentially the Cataphract's big brother. The damage range is basically the same. I think it was 27 to 34 versus 26 to 35. A little bit more health, a little bit more defense than the Cataphract. The difference is they don't have full protection, which is fine because they have that awesome ability to take hits on behalf of their friends. So I think you really want to use these guys in armies that have 2 high damage units paired with them. That way in the early rounds, the Swan Knights will take hits, and in the later rounds, your high damage units are hopefully still going to be mostly alive and continue to dish out damage. And since Swan Knights don't do very much damage on their own, I think that's why you also want to bring 2 high damage units. I can actually show a report from earlier. I've been testing Arwen's new half-elven ability tree. I really, really like it. So earlier, I paired Swan Knights with Sentinels and Bow Knights. Bow Knights because I was hitting 200 plus tiles, and there's always freaking trolls on these things, and Bow Knights are really good against trolls. But 2 high damage units plus the Swan Knight, and you can see it went, in my opinion, quite well. We had 293 dead there, and only 266 dead there. I was just able to just one-shot this 230 tile, no draws at all. So on defensive-oriented commanders or healing commanders like Arwen or Gandalf the Grey, I think this would be a very solid setup. If you're PvPing, you could trade out sharpshooters for the Bow Knights, unless you're expecting to fight trolls, as sharpshooters against non-large targets are better than Bow Knights, except in cases like Theoden because he gives those cavalry buffs. And then alternatively, I think another very viable army composition, I think I have some Bree riders left over, for a commander like Eowyn. So this would apply to Eowyn and Theoden, who are able to make great use of these guys. You can run Swan Knights, Cavaliers. I really need to clean up my barracks, oh my goodness. And Bree riders. So you have 2 high damage melee cavalry, which is exactly what Eowyn wants. And then you have Swan Knights to tank the hits for them. This would be probably the perfect Season 2 army composition for Eowyn. If you're in Season 1 or you don't have access to Bree Riders, you could always bring in Ram Riders instead. I would tend to shy away from using Cataphracts and Swans in the same army. However, as Eowyn, it might work out just because she wants all men melee cavalry. I don't have Theoden recruited, but we will pretend for a minute. Actually, I think my Eomer is out in the field. We can pretend for a minute, that's here gone, that Eomer is actually Theoden. What I would tend to run would be Swan Knights, Bow Knights, potentially, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing 200 plus tiles or expecting trolls in PvP, I would bring Bow Knights on Theoden. And then you can fill this in with either Rams, depending on what you expect to fight. If you're going to fight like Witch Kings or Erebor or other good factions, you can bring the Rams. If you're not, then you could actually trade out the Rams, and we'll just pretend we did that because he's out in the field, and just run Cavaliers as well. It'll also somewhat depend on your itemization. If you're running a Cutlass with Melee Might, for example, which I think I have that on my Aragorn King of Men now. If you're using like a Cutlass with Melee Might, you'll probably want to push towards Spree Riders, Cavaliers, Ram Riders. If you're using like Theoden's unique item, or potentially a Reach of the Rittermark with Might of Cavalry, then bringing Bow Knights along is certainly a viable option. But the moral of the story in the end is you want 2 units that can deal a bunch of damage. Make sure I get the webcam right here. And then the Swan Knight to tank the hits, take the damage for them. And all in all, I think Swan Knights are a really, really powerful tier 4 unit. Probably not quite as powerful as the Marshals, I wouldn't think. I don't know, I just have a thing for Rohan's Marshals. They're just so good in my opinion. But I do think that Swan Knights are one of the most powerful tier 4 units in the game. And the cool thing about them is they really open up army compositions like double ranged unit plus Swan Knight, which is super powerful on Arwen and Gandalf. And any type of commander like Haldir even could make really, really good use of that as well. So I do like that they open up those more unique army compositions, whereas Marshals, you just kind of throw them into an all melee cavalry mix and let them do their thing. All right, that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something useful. Let me know what you think about Swan Knights down in the comments section below. Do you think they're awesome? Do you think they're better than Marshals, worse than Marshals? Do you think they're the best tier 4 unit in the game? Let me know. And I'll catch you in the next one. Rise of the Phoenix, over and out.